I honestly, seriously did not think I could live without him. I did not think I could survive without this person, and that's an absolutely petrifying moment to be in. So when the police stepped in and removed him from the house, it's the scariest moment of my life.
From Mamma Mia, I'm Mia Freedman, and you're listening to No Filter, a podcast where I talk to people with an interesting story to tell. This is an episode about bravery and courage and losing yourself and then finding yourself again, but only after falling into a situation that almost destroys you. Nicole Lee has been using a wheelchair ever since she had a sporting accident when she was in primary school. And it was actually through sport many years later that she met her husband, who, over time, became her carer. What happened after that is something Nicole still finds it really difficult to talk about, and it's a story she's never fully told until now. It's certainly one I felt very privileged to hear her tell. Just a heads up, this episode of No Filter is an adult conversation, and if it brings up any issues for you, please reach out to Lifeline on 13 11 14 or dial 1-800-RESPECT. Here's Nicole Lee. I kept thinking of the word intersectional when I was thinking about you, and intersectionality is a word that some people don't really understand.
Yeah, so when we think about intersectionality, it's the fact that, we don't just exist in one little bubble. I don't just fit in the world of simply just women or a woman with a disability. Somebody can intersect across multiple different areas of diversity. So you could be a woman with a disability and you could also be part of the rainbow community, and you could also be trans. It's not a one-size-fits-all. And I know for someone with a disability, we tend to get thrown into just the one box of woman with a disability, yet we could be culturally diverse, we could be gender diverse. There's all sorts of – so it's that the fact that a label doesn't necessarily fit just one aspect of your being.
It's like you do wear a lot of different hats.
Yes.
And I was going to ask you, in terms of your disability advocacy, your advocacy on behalf of domestic violence victims, do you feel like you're more in one space than another at different times?
I feel like I'm more in the family violence space than I am in the disability advocacy space and activism space. I find that those two worlds are very much disconnected. And it's weird. I don't quite understand why, but I go into the family violence field and people are uncomfortable when I talk about experiencing violence as a woman with a disability. I go into sort of the disability world and they get a little uncomfortable when I start talking about the prevalence of violence. So there's this fair amount of disconnect between the two communities, and even working in this area, the two different sectors, so you've got the disability sector and you've got the family violence sector, those two really don't speak to each other. Well, not from my experience down in Victoria anyway, and it's very problematic. We need to address the problem involving everyone, not just one sort of sector is responsible for addressing the whole entire issue of violence against women.
That's why I was so interested to talk to you today and to have you tell your story. Now, I do want to ask you to tell your story, and if at any time you're uncomfortable, you just tell as much or as little as you want to. But I want to start by asking how long you've been in a wheelchair for.
So I've been in a wheelchair most of my adult life, and I had an accident when I was 8 and then I had surgery when I was 9. It's not something I really generally talk about. It's a lot of childhood trauma that I guess I really haven't dealt with or processed, and I probably never will. And, it's the point in my life where, I became other and I was no longer the same. So it's an uncomfortable little part of my life that is so long ago in the past.
Being a teenager is challenging enough, being a young woman, becoming a young woman. How did being in a wheelchair sort of impact on that for you in terms of relationships and sexuality?
In my 20s and trying to have relationships with people, and it's this is one of the topics that's a little bit more difficult for me to talk about. I don't feel the same as other women, and I didn't feel the same as other women around me. I didn't feel that I could dress the same. I didn't feel like I could express myself the same as other women. And I just didn't feel womanly. I felt different. And this is partly because I feel because there's a lack of representation of women with disabilities in our media, and also attitudes of other people around me as well. Whilst you brush a lot of things off, those things do tend to creep in and become, insidious inside of you and change the way you feel about yourself in regards to other people. And I know I did an interview with somebody who's doing some really interesting research recently, and some of the stuff that came up for me was the fact that when I was pregnant, I felt like a woman because my body was doing something that was visually womanly, and I became part of this woman tribe, and I felt accepted as being a mother and as being a woman like everybody else because people didn't so much notice my wheelchair as they did notice my baby bump. And then,
interesting.
Moving forward, taking kids to school and having young children sort of attached to me, I felt like I was part of this tribe of women. But now that my boys have grown up, they're no longer with me. And so you get responses from people when they're talking about their kids. They go, oh, yeah, I've got kids too. And they go, oh, my God, you're a mother? Yeah, I'm actually a grandmother. And they're quite shocked. And so, getting that response, it doesn't worry me. But, that stuff does kind of creep in a little. And I said, then sort of moving forward, and I've recently, mid last year, I had a mastectomy. And I've lost the most visually feminine part of my body, but I've gained a huge amount of femininity from
Tell
that.
me about that.
Well, it hit me when I realised that there's all these online forums and support groups for women post-mastectomy that decided to go flat. And I get accepted into these groups with other women as being one of them. They see that I'm flat. They don't see that I've got a disability. They don't see my wheelchair. So my body, again, did another thing that other women's bodies did.
And you're in another intersection.
Yeah, and I'm in another intersection. So it's a really, really weird kind of world to be in, and to have that realisation. It's like, actually, I feel more feminine now than I did before, but I've lost the most feminine part of my body.
Did you have breast cancer?
So my mother had breast cancer, so I had a preventative mastectomy. So I was getting checked for quite a few years in a row, and they detected a few changes. So eventually I got my doctor, and there was a big discussion with my doctor around choosing to go flat, that I didn't want to have a reconstruction.
I've never heard that expression before, choosing to go flat and going flat. You mean you didn't have a reconstruction?
Didn't have a reconstruction, yeah. And there's a lot of pressure from the doctors, and there was a lot of pressure from the medical professionals to have a reconstruction because they were worried how I'd feel as a woman with no boobs.
Yeah.
And that they wanted to give me a nice shape, but they didn't actually listen to what I was saying, in that these things are going to kill me. And I'm not really worried about having breasts right now. I'm worried about preventing cancer because the cure is quite horrific. The treatment is quite life impacting, even if you don't die from it. The treatment following on from breast cancer is quite horrific. So, because I've watched my mother go through it. And getting them to sort of try and see it from my point of view, eventually I had a plastic surgeon that agreed that maybe a reconstruction for a woman in a wheelchair isn't a great idea. They had to go in through the pec muscles and do all this really invasive surgery. And he said, you use your arms all the time, and I can't guarantee you won't lose strength, and you won't be able to use your arms for a good 6 weeks because it'll put pressure on the implants, and maybe this isn't a good option for you. And so that was eventually for my breast surgeon to go, okay, cool, we'll go with what it was you wanted.
There's an idea.
Yeah, there's an idea. And it's very, I get it, it's paternalistic of them, and they're worried about, doing the wrong thing, but, they're not listening to the choices that I actually wanted, and I do not regret it one bit, not one bit.
That's so interesting what you say about choosing to go flat and then being embraced into this other group of women who've made that same choice for various reasons, I imagine, has given you a way to be in touch with your female identity much more so than just having boobs. Yeah,
it's a weird way around getting back to that tribe of women, so to speak, but very profound once it actually sort of made sense in my head, very profound moment. And wow, there's a few studies that I could do into that.
How did you meet your husband?
So we met through disability sports. We were both playing wheelchair tennis back then.
He had a disability as well?
Yeah, he had a disability as well.
And he was in a wheelchair?
Yes, he was.
And was it Fast and Furious?
Yes. So
how old were you?
Going back in time, 24, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And
24. Was he around the same age?
5 years older, so not too much older. And, it was the, whirlwind romance. And, we moved in together quite quickly and then fell pregnant with my youngest not long after that. And then moving forward into, the stuff I know now, and I can read so many stories, and that's so common in that the whirlwind romance, things moved quick, went from dating to let's get married, let's have babies. That's quite common for
And
violence.
was he pushing to keep moving forward and keep this pace, or you were both just caught up with
caught up in this
crazy love?
Yeah, and that's the scary thing, is that that's one of the warning signs, but it's the most innocuous warning sign. Oh, my God, I'm madly in love. Geez, I should be really concerned about this.
That's a red flag. Yeah, but it's more the speed of everything happening.
Yeah, and I don't know how to make somebody. How do you pinpoint which is the speed of everything? The whirlwind romance, and which is the good whirlwind romance. How do you work that one out? You just don't.
And some whirlwind romances can collapse, but not necessarily from violence, just because you didn't know each other very well, which I guess is ultimately what the two common things are if you didn't know him.
Yeah.
When did the violence start?
So it was not long after my son was born, and he was quite young. He was still in the bassinet beside the bed. And
in the case of your marriage, it was sexual violence?
Yeah, it was sexual violence, and it started off as sexual violence from the very beginning. And then it evolved into the other forms as well.
Did you recognise it for what it was at the outset?
No. I remember being angry at him, and I remember being upset, and I remember saying to him that and I remember feeling like I'd been raped. And it took a while, I guess, until I'd sort of confided in a friend, and she reiterated those words to me, and then it really started to sink in. And he used to say things the next day, this makes me hate you. I need you to stop, you're hurting me. And of course, the nature of violence is that it goes in that cycle of there's an incident and then there's the next day of apologies, and you get caught up in that cycle of the I'm sorry, I didn't mean it, I won't do it again, I'm a bad person. And, when someone's crying in front of you, it does feel really genuine. And it's...
Until the next time.
Until the next time. And then it just keeps going. And women, we're so forgiving, and it's almost like the Florence Nightingale effect. We're so forgiving and we're so caring, and we just want to help, and we want to make things better, and we're trying constantly to fix things when it was never my responsibility to fix, and it was never my responsibility to help. But yeah, it's sort of try and switch that off when you think you care about this person.
Were you quite protective of him as well in terms of not telling other people what was going on because you didn't want them to think badly of him?
Yeah. Didn't want to be judged, didn't want them to think badly, all sorts of messed up things going on in your head when you're living through all of this. I used to confide in medical professionals, so my psychiatrist, and that was one of the ways that helped me cope. A lot of different people from hospitals and because, when you're going – that's the other thing, which I'll point out now, is when you're going through violence and you've been living it for years and years and years, to the external world, I looked like I was going crazy. To everybody else around us, I looked like I was losing my mind, because essentially I was. You're living with violence day in, day out. That has a massive impact on your mental health. And slowly I just slipped further and further sort of into depression, and then ended up with an eating disorder and suffered with anorexia quite severely. So to everybody else around us, I looked like I was losing it, and this man was, standing beside me and sticking with me no matter what was going on, even though he was the cause of the downfall of my mental health. I was in and out of hospital for eating disorder treatment, and I did see my psychiatrist every week, and unfortunately there was nothing he could do about it. So I'm telling him what's happening, and doctor-patient confidentiality laws meant that there wasn't really much he could do apart from remind me that, you don't have to live with this. And ultimately through all of that was my greatest support during that time, and kept me going in a weird sort of way.
It can be hard for anyone who's in any kind of abusive relationship to, first of all, recognise it, and second of all, escape it.
Yeah.
When you have a disability, there are other factors, aren't there, in terms of the intimate role he had as your carer. How did that manifest itself?
So I remember the police said something to me that was quite profound, in that you were more stuck than any other woman I've ever had to work with. So in the sense of, you're isolated from everyone. So I was my parents are much older and they're not in a position where they can help me or look after me. So I'm isolated from everyone. I'm not allowed to have much in the way of services come into the house. I'd push and I had a few, but not many. So I did not honestly think that I could survive without his support, that I couldn't get the kids to school, that ultimately I'd lose my children as well because I'm also the one that's going crazy. I'm the not so great parent in this scenario. And that, that I couldn't even pay a bill, that I had no independence of my own. I had no agency in any of these moments, that he controlled everything that happened and everything I did. And it's not so much, I hear a lot this codependent kind of relationship with somebody with a disability and their carer. And I think that's it's a harsh word in that he needed me to need him. But it's only codependent if it's not codependent if it's one-sided, that I didn't have a choice. So all I had was him. So it was, whilst being with him was horrific and bad and all of these things, I honestly, seriously did not think I could live without him. I did not think I could survive without this person, and that's an absolutely petrifying moment to be in. So when the police stepped in and removed him from the house, it's the scariest moment of my life.
Looking at you, Nick, you seem very independent.
Yes.
You seem very physically able. You're in a wheelchair, but you have complete upper body mobility. It seems like there wouldn't be much that you couldn't do because of your disability. Now, I'm saying this from the outside, not knowing anything. Yeah. How much of that was he made you more and more dependent on him, and how much of it was that you actually did need a very high level of care? So
there was a lot of both. So in about 2012, I ended up with a second injury, and that took me out of sport, and that was C5-6 spinal cord injury, so up in my neck. And that took a long time to recover from. So my mobility changed and my upper body strength was no longer quite what it used to be, and it's taken a very long time to get used to that. Nowhere near as strong as I used to be, that's for sure. Also, I know now for myself, like getting older, I'm a lot more tired. But there was a lot of, he just took over everything, and I just wasn't allowed to do things for myself, and I wasn't allowed to be independent. And the person you see in front of you today is completely different to the person that was back in that relationship. And you wouldn't recognise who I was, in that, I've said to people a few times, and I didn't even have a personality back then. That's how much of an empty shell of a human I'd become. And the other day I was having a conversation with someone, it was around service providers, and I was trying to get them to understand this concept of agency. And when they talk about, we're not going to tell a woman to leave if she wants to stay, that's her right, and who are we to tell a woman what to do? Now, need people to redefine their concept of agency, because me back then, I had no agency. He had it. Every decision I made was what I thought was going to make him happy. Every choice that I would make was what was going to appease this person, what was going to keep him calm, and what was going to keep me safe and alive, and my children alive. And so when the police stepped in and they removed him from the house and they took the decision away from me, and I'm totally, I begged them not to because I was so scared. And they're saying to me, you won't protect yourself, so we have to. And we know you can't see this now, but one day you will. And they were dead right, that they didn't step in and take the decision away from me. They took the decision not to leave away from him. I wasn't staying because I was having fun. I was staying because leaving felt way more dangerous. And as we know, that women, when the context of leaving is most likely when they're going to be murdered. And that's the most dangerous period for women in violence. So when services, are waiting for somebody to enact some concept, their informed choice, they're waiting for somebody to make a decision that they don't have the capacity to make. I never had that capacity to make the decision to leave. Now, I'm talking from the perspective of somebody who was living with it for 10 years. So it's a bit different to, some women do still have that capacity if they've left earlier on. But if you've got someone who's been living with that for 10, 20, 30 years, they don't have a decision or a choice of their own, and we're just waiting for them to get up and walk out one day when that's actually not possible for them. And so when the police stepped in and they took that decision off him. They handed over, I guess, to the service system. Here's this broken woman and here's her agency. Now help her find it again. And I did. And it took a couple of years and I was supported and I did eventually find my voice and my ability to care for myself, and I got services in place, support workers to take up the position of what he was doing to help me. And I was able to be independent and I was able to live at home and stay in my own home with my children and continue to be a mother. But that took a couple of years and I needed support to regain, who I was. And when I look back and I don't know at what point I lost all of that.
You used a phrase a moment ago about when the police said that they needed to take him away to protect you. You used the phrase dead right. They were dead right. That kind of brings us to what got to the point where they intervened.
Yeah, so everything came to a crisis point. So I'd spent so much time talking to my psychiatrist about all of this, and like I said, there was nothing he could do. And there was points in time when I was in hospital and they knew what was going on and nobody took any action.
You're in hospital for anorexia?
In hospital for anorexia, yeah. And nobody took any action. There was one point in a family therapy session where he admitted to what he was doing and he got aggressive and they asked him to leave. But at no point did anybody call the police. He just admitted to committing a crime, but nobody actually took any action. And that still confuses me as to why they didn't. As I said, everybody's waiting for me to enact an informed choice and make my own independent decision when I was not an independent person. So it's a bit of a harsh position to put a woman in.
Do you think also the fact that he was in a wheelchair, although it seems like he had a higher level of mobility than you,
much
correct?
Higher level of mobility, yeah.
There's a sense of almost back to what you were saying earlier as people don't see you as a woman when you're in a wheelchair, is that people don't see him as potentially an abuser because he was in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
Did that mean that he could get away with it for a lot longer?
I think so. I think that had a lot to play with it. Also, I wonder whether the intersect of mental health as well, and I don't think we treat women too well in our mental health systems, but sort of getting down to why the police stepped in and when they did is that he'd attacked me 4 times in 1 week and I took an overdose because I didn't know how else to get out and I didn't want to live anymore. I couldn't cope with it. And in the emergency department the next day they asked me why. And I just bluntly said to them, because my husband raped me 4 times this week and I don't want to live anymore. And they're just dumbfounded with that. And their response was, would you like to go to a refuge? And it's like, well, I can't. My kids are at home. I can't leave my children there. I need to go back to them. I'll never see my kids again. If you send me to a refuge, Jesus, I'm in an emergency department for trying to take my own life. I'll never see my boys again. And that's just not possible. I can't do that. So they called him to come pick me up. But this is where the point of difference is. Somebody somewhere in that emergency department called the police and they called child protection. And that's where things changed. And
the fact that there were children in the
Yes.
house meant that child protection could get involved and because it was a house where crimes were being committed and there was violence.
Yes. So child protection came to the house and asked us very bluntly.
In front of your husband?
In front of my husband, the two of us together. So I didn't want to actually tell them anything at that point. I was like, no, I'm not going to talk to you. I'm not talking to you about this. I'm not telling you anything. I'm so scared they're going to take my children away.
Yeah.
So they said, well, Nicole was admitted to the emergency department after taking an overdose and said that you'd raped her 4 times. What have you got to say about that? And he's like, yeah.
He admitted it?
He admitted it. And I guess this is where...
Why do you think he admitted it, Nick?
I guess he had a lot of problems and there was... I don't think he fully understand the severity of what he was doing. I'm pretty sure he does now.
Well, he's been to jail now.
Yes, he has, and I'm hoping, and I really, really hope that he understands the severity of what he was doing. But yeah, there's I guess a lot of entitlement and a lot of all husbands do this. We just don't talk about it, and what about my needs?
You talk about gaslighting. Tell me, for people who aren't familiar with the term, can you explain how he used that against you?
So a lot of using my mental health against me to make me believe things that were not true and to make me feel like I was going crazy, even down to things getting moved around the house and stuff going missing and then finding it sort of hidden later. Like, no, that never happened. And you start to question your own sanity and you start to question your own reality. And the other really, really hard thing is in hospital when people weren't taking action, I'm telling them what's happening and I'm telling nurses and doctors and this comes out in family therapy, and having them not act also, it's like the whole system gaslighted me into thinking that, okay, this isn't actually as bad as I'm making it out to be. This isn't as bad as what I'm thinking. They don't seem to be responding. They don't seem to be worried about it. So
it's like you saying my house is on fire and no one's calling the fire brigade.
And no one's calling the fire brigade, or the fire brigade is turning up and just going, oh, it's just a little fire. It's fine. What are you worried about? We'll come back when it's worse. And you start to, you question your own reality. And that's what was going on around me. He was doing it, but then so was the mental health system too. He
also made you question whether it was your fault, didn't he? By saying, oh, you just don't want sex enough, your libido's not high enough, I've got needs.
And this is, one of the toxic arguments I'm also hearing from Bettina Arndt at the moment is around that men have needs and you hear this argument and I used to fully 100% believe that men and women had different sex drives because of what he was telling me. You just don't have a high enough sex drive and I do, and that's just the difference between men and women. And I believed this. And I believed this as, well, that it was my fault that I'm making him do this because I just don't want sex enough or I'm just not interested enough. And that I need to fix me. I need to go and get help for me. And this is why I was seeing a psychiatrist for multiple things because, the nature of all the violence as well and his aggression was because it was my fault. And you've got problems. You're the one who's crazy. You need to go fix yourself and then we'll be fine. Our marriage will be fine.
When the police took him away, what was that process? Did they arrest him or they just removed him from the house?
They arrested him and questioned him on that first day. And at that point, I didn't want to make a statement. So they questioned him in relation to what had been said to child protection, and they removed him from the house that day. So they went and they got the car keys and they gave them to me and asked me if I was okay to drive home.
And were you?
Well, yeah, I made it home. I can't say I was okay, but I got home. And Child Protection picked up my children from school and brought them home. So there's a massive impact on, 1 second my children had a mother and a father and a family as messed up and toxic and scary and violent as the house was. It was all they knew. To all of a sudden, your dad's not coming home.
How did you explain it to the kids, or did they already know?
They explained it to the kids on the way home, and just that, your dad's not going to be coming home for a while, or if ever. Yeah, there was not really much in the way of level of explaining it to them, the reasons why. But they knew that because they'd witnessed the violence and they'd witnessed his anger. So they knew as well that, this wasn't a happy household and that this, we weren't safe.
From the outside, if this was like a fairy tale or a storybook, it would be, okay, the bad man got removed from the house, everyone's happy, let's celebrate. But that's not how you or the kids felt in those early days.
No, it felt like we were being punished. It was really hard. So when something like this happens, I was left with all of the bills, all of the debts that he'd racked up. I had no idea what electricity company I was with or even how to pay a bill. I didn't really know how to.
Financially abused you, had taken away all of your financial autonomy.
Yeah, he'd sold my house on me and bought this other house that I now live in. While I was in hospital, he comes in with paperwork saying, with an estate agent, and I've got a tube up my nose because I'm refusing to eat, and here, sign these papers to sell your house. It was really very toxic, and I just wonder what this estate agent must have been going through her mind as she's coming into, a mental health facility.
How is that even legal?
I don't know. No, I don't think it really is.
Was there a degree of relief, or it was just fear?
Just fear. At that point, it was just fear. So, like I said, not knowing how I'm going to get my kids to school. I'm severely underweight. I'm really struggling, and I've got no one. And
how old were they at this point?
So my oldest would have been 16, and my youngest was 9. And, I've got Child Protection breathing down my neck, who ended up actually being my best allies in the end. Once I got past the fear.
That they would take the kids away.
Yeah, that they would take the kids away, and I realised that I needed to work with them because they would help me.
How did they help?
Well, they protected us. They went into battle with us. They were the ones there in children's court. They were on our side. They understood what the violence was, and they didn't dance around it. They would, my worker would sit there and talk with me about it all, and help me, I guess, express what was going on. And in the end, I ended up having supervision orders, which stopped him from seeing the children without having supervised access, which also helped keep them safe and helped keep me safe. So it was another level of protection that was on top of the intervention order again. So, as scary as it is having to working with them, they were actually my best allies in all of this process.
Did you see him again?
I saw him a bit on and off. It's really weird, and this is stuff that's I go back over in my mind. Did I do all the wrong things? Is that we did still make contact with each other afterwards. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought that I just need to reassure him that everything's okay. I need to reassure him that he was going to be okay.
You still felt protective of him?
I still had to protect him, and I still had to, strangely, I felt that I had to still keep him happy because I was still scared. Because, in a breakdown, any time, any hint of we were going to break up was that his behaviour would escalate and become erratic. And I'm like, I need to calm him down. I didn't honestly acknowledge at that point the danger I was in. I didn't know because nobody had said to me, now actually you're in a lot of danger and this is when most women get murdered. Nobody told me that. But some internal
sixth sense
and protective side of my mechanism within myself sort of enacted, and it's like I just need to keep this person happy because that's what's going to keep me safe. And I can acknowledge that now, but I couldn't at the time, and it just felt horrible and yuck having any contact. But then after I eventually did go and make a statement, so I'd sort of said, okay, one total last chance, because maybe if everyone else, because they're telling him what I'd been telling him all of these years, maybe he might believe them. So my deal with the police was like, I've just got to give him one more chance. Let him go to the programs. Let him, let all of this sink in that, okay, what I was doing, this was rape, this was offence, this was an offence, and this is a crime, and I need to go and get help. So I'm going to let him just go and deal with that. And he called me to say that he told them to stick their program very abusively. He wrote a letter to Child Protection, and then that day I called the police and said I need to make the statement. He's refusing to get the help. I'm really, really lucky that it was a socket unit, so a sexual assault and child abuse investigation team. And so the detectives, okay, cool, come in now. If they had waited till the next day, the apologies would have come out and that cycle would have started all over again.
And you would have been drawn back into his web.
I would have been drawn back in, I would have been drawn right back in, and I would have given him yet another chance, as we do. And these are the things that you look back and I tell myself that then I feel stupid for. There's no nice way. I know it's harsh, but there's really no great way to sort of describe it. But the thing is, it wasn't my stupidity.
But you weren't in your right mind.
No,
you'd been brainwashed.
I'd been brainwashed, exactly. So it wasn't my stupidity. It was this. It's just the stupidity of the whole entire situation and the brainwashing and the things that you start to believe that they're making you believe. That's all the stupid stuff. It wasn't me.
No.
Like I said, there's no other way to sort of describe it, and you think, and you're really harsh on yourself in these moments. But sort of looking back, I know that it wasn't my fault, and I responded the way majority of women respond when they're in this situation. And I went in and I made that statement and didn't take it back, and that was the turning point.
And he went to jail.
And he went to jail.
He pled guilty, so you were spared a trial.
Yep, he pled guilty, and I was spared a trial, and he went to jail.
What was the process of recovery like for you? I mean, you're still on it, I imagine, and you've talked about that very few people acknowledge the long-term effects of domestic violence. Yeah, so I'll be on this journey of recovery, for want of a better word, for I guess the rest of my life, and the impacts are quite great and profound sometimes. And my new partner, unfortunately, has to bear witness to a lot of it, and I'm really grateful that he's there to hold me through those moments. But in the early days, you're just getting by from one day to the next. And so I'm going through a sentencing hearing and making a victim impact statement, and that all happens really quickly, and most of it's out of your control. And it's
one of the hard bits about going through a criminal process is that you become totally de-identified in a court. So you become a witness and you become a list of charges in a courtroom, and sitting there and hearing the list of charges getting read out, knowing that all of his family is there listening, is shocking.
Were they there to support him?
Yeah, they were there to support him. So I was in a remote witness facility with some support staff, and I was able to cover the camera so they couldn't see me, and just listening to all of this and
them saying what a great bloke he was.
Yeah, it's a hard one. I'd hate to be in their position. I really would. Like, this is their son, and how do you condemn yet still support someone? It's a difficult position for the families to be in of somebody who's committed a violent offence, and I don't envy them one bit, and I can't judge how they've responded. This is their son.
Yeah, I think
it's a difficult one. It's a really difficult one.
You've certainly suffered far more though, and the effects are far more ongoing. What do you have to be careful of?
So these days, oh my goodness, there's so many little bits and pieces and things, random triggers. Not that I really like the word triggers, but there's stuff that will, if somebody yells, that will set off a process that goes for quite a few days. And I think I wrote a piece about this. I call it the second closed door that we don't talk about, which is the flow and effect of violence and the effect that trauma has on you. In that, so I get symptoms from PTSD, and one of the big things is that I disassociate. So I don't remember any of this. So my partner tells me everything, the stuff that's happened. In that, I don't remember who I am. I don't remember where I am. I don't know who he is. I don't know what's going on.
Wow.
And sometimes I'll take off in the car and I will run away, and it takes quite a few days to get through this, and it's really confronting because I'm very visually distressed.
You get stuck in fight or flight, and you have to flee, and that must be scary for you and scary for your partner.
Yeah, and I don't know what it looks like, so all I can go judge almost by what my partner tells me, and that it sounds really scary. And I know afterwards, as I'm starting to I'm kind of here, but then it sort of flows on for a few days, and I'll have moments where I'll be like, I don't actually know what I'm doing. I don't know where I'm going. I'm really confused, and this is the stuff that's really hard to deal with, and this is the stuff that we don't tend to talk about with other survivors of violence. And is these moments, and I don't know from the other women that are around me how much this affects them and how much it doesn't, but I guess it's all on a continuum. And it's hard. I find it really, really hard. It's quite scary to all of a sudden find yourself somewhere and you don't know where you are and you don't know how you got there, and you're just frightened and you're sad and you can't work out why. And these are the things that we don't sort of support victims through in the long term who've come out of violence. We sort of, once they've left, they'll be right, they'll be okay, they're free. But we don't, there's not sort of ongoing for years and years of support available. And this also goes for children who've been affected as well. There's not much support for them at all. And my boys also have moments where they get triggered and they both respond very differently. And I've been slowly working, especially with my oldest, getting him to see that feeling things build, and that's not actually the situation that's caused it. It's actually from stuff from the past that has been brought up, which is heightening all of these emotions and heightening all of these feelings that is coming up in him, and being able to recognise it and notice it and remove himself from the situation before it gets worse or before it escalates. And, as I said, it's really hard to go through this and have no support, and it's very isolating and it's very lonely to be in a room surrounded with people and trying to smile while slowly, feeling sometimes slightly dead inside.
It's almost like in some ways the violence and its effects don't stop when the violence itself stops, or when the perpetrator is removed, or even if he goes to jail, the victim is left with ongoing ramifications.
Yeah. The trauma and the impacts they're huge, and there's many. One of the really random ones is having to navigate web pages and logins and
a trigger. It's like someone set off a trigger and suddenly you're jolted into a headspace unexpectedly. Why logins and websites?
So when he was removed, I had never really used a computer before. I hadn't used
really? This was only
email.
5 years ago.
Yeah, so because he did it all. Because apparently I was too stupid to do these things and you're not technologically minded, so I need to do them for you, which is completely untrue. Okay, I'm not great with computers, but I can make my way around them. And yeah, it wasn't me that was stupid. But so when he moved in, I used to go down to the post office to pay my bills because nobody had a computer really in their house back in 2004. It was quite common for people not to have a computer or for them to not have home internet. It wasn't sort of a widely spread used commodity, like unless you were working and it was part of your job or you were running a business. Most people didn't have this kind of technology on hand and used to go to the post office and pay a bill. So he moved in and all this stuff's changed over that 10-year period, and eventually it got to the point where we predominantly relied on computers. So he just took over all of that. So when he was removed, all of a sudden I was like, I had to find how to pay a bill, who's my gas company, because none of the paper bills came to the house. They all went to the email, which was his email. I had no access to any of it, let alone how to access it. And so I'm calling people and say, you can just go and jump online and fill out this form there. And so I'm in total panic and I'm living like a nightmare at this point. And
everything he'd said to you about you're too stupid, you won't be able to do it.
Yeah, all of these things are coming up and all of these things are replaying back in my head, and I just needed someone to help me and I needed someone to sit down with me and help me find where all these things were and make all of these phone calls. But here is me sitting on the floor in my bedroom crying, asking Telstra to please help me. I don't know how to use this modem. I have no idea what I'm doing.
I don't either. What hope did you have? Yeah. Most people don't understand modems.
No, and 2 hours on the phone to a credit card company trying to find out how much do I even owe in a joint credit card that I never used, and finding all of these debts. And they're like, if you can just jump online, and it's like, don't do that. And it's like, no, can you just talk to me on the phone? So 2 hours on the phone to the credit card trying to work out a payment plan. I'm like, okay, I owe this money. And yes, it's in both our names, but you're not going to get it out of him. So you need to deal with me and we need to work through this. And that took 2 hours and that was so exhausting. All of these processes were exhausting, humiliating and really overwhelming, yeah, that's the word. So massively overwhelming. And I did that across so many things. Everything was just jump online and it's like, oh my God, can't I just
so that even now can be
so now when
those feelings of distress.
Yeah. So now whenever I have to try and do something online, fill out a form or apply for something, I'm thrown back into that moment of starving, for one, because I wasn't eating, of total overwhelmed fear. I'm thrown straight back into that moment back in 2014 whenever I'm looking at those pages, and I try to keep myself calm because I know it's not actually happening right now and I'm safe and everything's all right, but it comes up. And
it's not rational, is it?
Oh, the anxiety just becomes huge and it's just a login. And and it's all because of this moment in time.
All of these breadcrumbs that have been left.
Yeah.
You decided, though, to lean into this and become an advocate for victims of domestic violence and family violence. You testified at the Royal Commission in Victoria into family violence, and you made a foray into politics.
Yeah. So this wasn't something that I went out and was seeking. It kind of just followed me. So we had the Royal Commission into Family Violence. That was 2015 in Victoria. And I was one of the 5 lay witnesses that was invited to come and give evidence. Which,
at the time, a year after.
Yeah, a year after. I didn't actually quite understand how significant that moment was. So I'd gone to a roundtable discussion and they said, we'll help you write a submission. So they helped me write a submission, and then from there said, actually, we'd like to invite you to give evidence. And really, really profound moment. And I thought everything would just stop there. And then from that I was invited to be on what's the Victim Survivors Advisory Council, which was one of the recommendations that came out of the Royal Commission alongside 11 other people. And so this is where I met Tarang Chawla, my fellow person that I ran with in the Victorian election.
And Tarang had lost his sister to domestic violence.
Tarang had lost his sister to domestic violence, and his sister Nikki, she was murdered in, I think it was early 2015. And we've connected on this council, and also sort of, Phil Cleary and Rosie Batty and Liana Papoutsis, and there's this huge range of other people on this council. But, the two people I think I've connected the most with has been Tarang and Phil Cleary, of all the people in this world. He's an amazing mentor. But, Tarang and I, at the end of last year, we're feeling that something had sort of changed in the air. Something has changed in the family violence space, and we felt there was an urgency and we needed to do something. So we threw our hat in the ring to run as independent candidates for the upper house in Victoria. It is the most exhausting process I have ever been through in my life. It was pretty huge. So 6 weeks of just he and I, with, his partner and my partner, his mum and dad supporting us. We didn't have a team of people around us. It was just us, up at 6 o'clock in the morning and then awake until 2 o'clock at night, going through social media and getting ready for the next day. And boy, interesting process.
Did you think you'd get across the line?
Not really. We kind of hoped. We kind of really, really, really hoped. But the goal was to get across the line. But I guess the really bizarre thing was that once you bring politics into something, people got really uncomfortable. And, trying to get the media to pick up. This is the first time anybody has ever run on an ending violence against women agenda in Australia, ever.
Yeah.
And we couldn't get anybody to grab it and run with it. Maybe if somebody, like the project, it's sort of like, come on, Tarang, come and speak about it, then maybe he'd have a seat right now. Maybe if more people knew, and trying to get the word out when we've got such a minimal budget in which to do it was really
And that's
tricky.
the thing, isn't it? Because I didn't even know about it. I mean, we're a women's media company, and when I found out after the election, I was like, how did we not know about this? We would have put everything behind it. But as you say, when you have a minimal budget, there's only so much information you can get out there.
Yeah, and trying to tweet to different media outlets, and I don't know who monitors their media and who sort of vets as to what's important and what's not is really quite interesting. So
Nick,
I guess that's a lot of the people whoever's filtering what the emails and what comes through are the ones to ultimately
the gatekeepers.
Yeah, the gatekeepers. Yeah.
What's life like today? 5 years out from the ground zero of escape.
I still have my moments where it's really tricky. Life is so different now to what it was back then. Oh my God, I'm going to uni. I'm doing so much advocacy.
What are you doing at uni?
Social work. I don't know whether I really want to be a social worker, but I'm just enjoying studying. But
you've got a grandchild.
I do have a grandchild, and he's 10 months old now, and he's so cute. It's so amazing.
Is that a corrective experience in some ways? Because when your son was 10 months old, you were in a very different place, or is it kind of triggering?
No, it's not. I can just enjoy this little baby.
And then give back.
And give back, yeah. But I can he can cry, and I just think, oh my God, that's so cute, you're crying.
Not my problem.
Not my problem. Yeah, it's completely different being on this side of it. And
you're not even 40 yet though, are you?
No, 40 soon. Very soon, actually, in March. But yeah, he can cry, and I just think it's gorgeous. And he does, I need to change his nappy. He's like, oh yeah, that smells. Isn't that funny?
You were talking about
you
were talking about the NDIS as well, and how that for people with a disability, it means that you can separate the role of partner from the role of carer.
Yeah, and the NDIS has the capacity to do that for people, and unfortunately we're not quite reaching that, and we're not quite hitting that mark yet, in that I know full well if I was still with my ex-husband now, he would have taken control of my NDIS. He'd be controlling the funds, we'd be self-managing, and I'd still be just as stuck as I was before. But it's ludicrous considering we have a system that can give people this freedom and can give people choice and control. And like I was saying before about agency, is that in the NDIS planning meetings is these planners are waiting for somebody to say something and to enact their agency when, especially for not all people with disability. So I'll just point that out. Not everybody with a disability has grown up in a family or grows up in a home where this kind of treatment is happening. But some of us have never been allowed to make a decision of our own ever in our life, especially for women with disability, and some men, depending on where they are in the disability hierarchy, have never been allowed to make a decision of their own, never been allowed to do something for themselves ever in their lifetime. And we're expecting them in a planning meeting to all of a sudden say, yeah, no, I want to make my own choices. I want to make my own decisions. It's
5 years ago, you would never have said that.
No, and you're just expecting somebody to have this say that doesn't have the capacity to do that, and that's a massive flaw in the system. That something needs to be done, and there's ways around doing this, and there's ways that they could be doing this better than what they actually are, and it's such a shame because it's the perfect recipe to give people that freedom if it's done right, and it's just not being done right at the moment.
And just finally, Nick, if people had to take away one thing, or if you could teach people one thing about being a good ally to survivors or victims of domestic violence, what would it be?
That's a really good one. To listen to us, give us space to talk, and invite a different array of voices into this space. To look outside of the mould and to reserve your judgment, I guess, is another thing as well, I think is really important. I think I'd written a piece, I don't know whether you read the one around the patriarchal mould, that, when we talk about gender equality, and that's really quite hard to watch continuously being rolled out, people going, yeah, we're diverse, when we've got 50% of men and women who are white, able, straight, neurotypical people. That's not diversity. It doesn't work for the men, it doesn't work for the women. In that, to start looking for a diverse array of people to be involved in, your events, to come and speak, to work for you, all sorts of things. And I think maybe not so much as an ally for people who are trying to support somebody through escaping violence, is that what I was talking about before, in redefine your concepts of agency. And that, I'd heard somebody say, but I'm a feminist, I'm not going to tell a woman what to do. And as I'd said earlier, is that redefine that concept, and that her decision isn't necessarily her decision.
Thanks so much, Nick. It's been such an honour to be your first podcast interview and hear you tell your story at length. I've heard parts of it, but you're just so articulate. You're writing. Please keep writing.
Thanks.
It's just so beautiful. We'll put links to all your writing.
Thank you.
You're writing on Medium now a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, my partner helped me set that up, and
it's just
helps
beautiful.
me navigate that one, because that's always a stress. Like, hang on, how do I post this again? How do I publish another article? Oh my God,
you can do it. You've got this.
Yes, I've got this. I can do this. And every new challenge is another step forward in redefining who I am and refinding who I am. And I'll probably be doing it for the rest of my goddamn life. I'll be 60 and still wondering, what do I want to be when I grow up?
Well, given how far you've come in the last 5 years, I can only begin to imagine how far you're going to come in the next.
There's no set direction at the moment. The doors are open for anything and everything the universe wants to send in my direction, you could say.
All of it good.
Thanks.
What a woman. Nicole now uses her voice to speak out on behalf of other women and people with disabilities who cannot advocate for themselves. And she's a passionate public advocate who's played a really major role in helping victims of family violence through her appointment to the Victim Survivors Advisory Council. As she says, we can't get away from the fact that women with disabilities are vulnerable. Society is slowly changing, but as much as people hate hearing it, women are already on the back foot. And then you add a disability, we're so much further behind. That's what Nicole is working to change. You can follow her on Twitter, _Nick_Lee, or on Medium, where she publishes her writing. You might also see her on The Drum on the ABC, where she often appears as a commentator. And we'll put a link to Nicole's Twitter and her Medium account in our show notes. If this episode has raised any issues for you, please call 1-800-RESPECT. This episode of No Filter was produced by Liza Ratliff and Bridget Northeast. I'm Mia Freedman. We'll see you soon.